I don't think you realize how terrible and how pornographic and how descriptive and how, I mean, truly vile and exploitative the content of these books really are. I can't believe that you are not willing to publish the content of these books. Will you commit to me to put in your story excerpts? And I said, I'll provide you the titles and you can go do the research. And she said, that's not how journalism works. You don't tell me what to do.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Loopcast, where we talk faith, culture, and politics. And today I thought could be a little bit different. I received a call from the president of CatholicVote. He also happens to be my boss. And when you get a call from the president, you answer. And so we thought today would be a good opportunity to kind of let some of the listeners in on what a day in the life for a CatholicVote employee is. You know, some days more interesting than others. And when I got the call, the story was too good not to share. So Brian, thanks for coming on and taking the time here.
Good to be back in the Loopcast. I got a good one for you.
Yeah. So Brian, you received a call from someone from the New York Times, I believe. And I got to let you tell it. What was the call about and how did it go?
Yeah, so we get calls from media all the time. Some small media, some big media. Some of you may have seen I've been on Fox News a lot lately regarding the Dodgers. But this was, the New York Times had reached out to us, which is not a normal day, but occasionally they do, paying attention to what we're doing, saying they wanted to talk about an incident that occurred in San Diego, where apparently two individuals checked out books that they objected to and sent a letter to the library that seemed very similar to a letter that we were recommending CatholicVote followers and activists to send to their library, saying, unless and until you remove these books, we are going to keep them checked out because, again, we want to protect children from vile and obese content that is being foisted on us, particularly during June. So I did finally write back. I wrote back to the reporter. It was kind of fun because I put as a subject line, CatholicVote library porn, because it's exactly what it is. And we scheduled a time to call. And I proceeded to have a phone interview with her. This is about a week ago or so. The interview was probably the most hostile interview I've ever been on. And I've been interviewed by a lot of hostile people. Journalists are supposed to be even keel, gather the story, not get emotionally involved in the story they're reporting on. This reporter just did not take lightly to some of the comments I was making and some of the characterizations, and frankly, some of the ways that I was trying to push her to cover the story. Specifically, what I told her was that I think she and many journalists are getting this story all wrong. And what they're doing is they are writing stories to please their readers who are ideologically predisposed to think of people like us as book-burning, right-wing fanatics that hate gay people and that we just want to go back to the dark ages and that we have no sympathy or appreciation for the plight of gay and lesbian kids. And how dare we go into public libraries and try to keep resources and healthy information away from kids. I mean, that's the story they want to write. Big bad Catholics, big bad Brian Burch, big bad CatholicVote. And I said to her, I think you're getting the story all wrong. After she asked a number of fact-based questions, do we have this campaign? Did we contact these people? Are we familiar with what happened in San Diego? And when I tried to push her to get away from the politics is a war of persons, and I said, the substantive question here is the content of these books. And it's interesting that you as a reporter, and no national reporter of any significance that I'm aware of, is willing to write on the actual story, which is, what is it that is in these books that is so objectionable? Why are parents, at least, relatively recently, for the first time, trying to check out books to keep them away from kids? I said, are you familiar with what's in these books? And she said, I've looked at them. I said, which ones? She couldn't answer. I said, have you actually read any of the content of these books? No, she had not. So, ding number one, she's writing a story about books, about content in books that parents object to, and she as the reporter has not even read any of them. And I said, the trouble here is, and I have a bunch of excerpts sitting in front of me, I can't even read the excerpts of these books to you in a phone interview as adults because they're so vile and terrible and pornographic and obscene. And I said, because I have enough respect for you as a person, whether or not you're a journalist or not, that I am not going to degrade myself and degrade you by reading some of the things that are in here. And yet these books are being foisted on our kids, put on library displays, and being characterized as these essential resources that kids need to read. And for the listeners that are, paying attention here, I don't think you realize how terrible and how pornographic and how descriptive and how, truly vile and exploitative the content of these books really are. I'm not going to read it on this Loopcast. It's that bad. And I said again to her, I can't believe that you are not willing to publish the content of these books. Will you commit to me to put in your story excerpts? And I said, I'll provide you the titles and you can go do the research. And she said, that's not how journalism works. You don't tell me what to do. And I said, I'm not telling you what to do. What I'm trying to help you to understand is the story here is the books, not the people. And yet you want to focus on the people. You want to focus on these parents in San Diego that are trying to protect kids' innocence. And you want to focus on me and what big bad Catholic Vote is trying to do to encourage parents to do this. I said, the story is the books. Again, a decade ago, we weren't having these controversies. And now we are. Why is that? What changed? What changed is the books. And yet these reporters refuse to talk about it. And so the interesting thing is we got a little heated there, and especially when I said that I respected her enough not to read them. She felt that was condescending. And she said, well, that's your opinion. And I said, my opinion? No, it's a fact that I actually do respect you enough not to do this. Anyway, we went back and forth, and she again tried to accuse me of telling her how to do her job to the point where it got so tense that she just ended the interview. She said, well, thank you very much. And we ended the conversation very abruptly, very awkwardly.
Can I clarify too? When you said we, it sounds like she ended the conversation. Like you weren't done.
Oh, of course.
Right. Okay.
No, I certainly wasn't done. I was ready to answer, any of the questions that she wanted to ask. She ended the interview. About 3 minutes later, she calls me back. So I guess she took a couple deep breaths, called me back, realized that it was totally unprofessional what she was doing. Asked me to verify a couple more facts, and which I gladly answered, calmly answered, and then didn't hear from her again. And we've been waiting now for this New York Times story to happen. No, that was chapter 1. Now, chapter 2, since we're using book analogies here, I get an email yesterday. The reporter's writing me back again. Of course, you see Joe Cowan, New York Times, graduate of University of California, Berkeley, by the way. Might tell you something a little bit, at least given what I know of the school. She says, we're getting ready to publish our story any day now, and we'd like to know if you would be willing to be photographed for our story. And so, of course, you know me, I love getting Catholic Vote attention, and who doesn't like, some attention from the New York Times, as despicable as that paper is.
Can I ask, where would you have gone to take said picture?
I'm actually looking at the email now. I think apparently they were going to send some professional photographer to apparently, my office here. And I would guess I would get dressed up, and we know exactly what this would be. It would probably be a black and white photo. They would add some effects to it.
They can make you look a little bit more yellow than you are, kind of like they did to Joe Rogan over the horse dewormer thing. I think you would have got a Joe Rogan treatment for sure.
No doubt. And then, of course, because it's the New York Times, any Google search of my name, that's going to be one of the primary images that I get to live with for the next, the next several years. So right. I'll just read you what I wrote back to her because I think it's interesting. I said, Jill, thank you for writing back. As I mentioned to our phone call, I am concerned that your story will avoid the actual story here, namely the content of these books that have led to widespread opposition and efforts to shield them from kids. The fact that you want my picture tells me your story is about me, Catholic Vote, or the individuals trying to protect kids from indecent books, rather than the books themselves. My sense is this is a big reason why this country is so divided over these issues. Journalists like you write stories to appease ideologues, making the personal the political, framing people as the problem rather than providing a basis for compromise and dialogue on the substantive issues that are driving this debate. For that reason, I don't see any value in having my picture taken for a story that will likely be unfair, given your hostility over the phone, and a story that will regretfully avoid the actual story that needs to be reported. Brian. So she wrote back, of course, very simply, I'm sorry to hear that you're not comfortable being photographed. We understand. Thank you for your time! ! And so here we are. Any day now, we expect this New York Times story to come out. Regrettably, for those with New York Times subscriptions, no photo of me included.
And that's a real travesty because, Brian, you're a good-looking guy. But a question for you. So you know that you're going to get a bad edit, essentially. Anytime you go on places like the New York Times, you know it's going to be a bad edit. When you were going through that interview, did you feel like you needed to speak in a certain way or stick to a certain message to avoid giving them more ammunition to shoot at you? Or are you just comfortable enough with people being able to read with their own two eyes, like this is going to be a hit piece?
It's funny because you do enough of these interviews, and some of the times you get really argumentative and you want to get your points out and to, stay on message and deliver the lines that you want them to deliver so that you can get, your story, your side of the story out. But there's other times, and especially with papers like New York Times, that reporter is likely not employed there, and his name is Ross Douthat, and he's going to be on your side, his or her side, if I'm allowed to use a pronoun.
I'll allow it.
But then, so when you get these conversations, there are times, because usually these pretty intelligent people, to get a job at the New York Times, you're intelligent, well-educated. I try to figure out if there's some common ground to have. Like, is there a place where we can actually talk about the real story? And this was part of my point. I wasn't trying to tear her down personally. I'm sure she disagrees with us. That's fine. The question is, you are writing a story about parents that are taking books out of libraries because they find them objectionable. And it seems to me that story cannot be told unless you actually tell the story about what's in the books. That's what people are getting so angry about. That's why people are doing these bold things. That's why they're writing to their libraries, doing things, by the way, that moms and parents used to never do. They would never feel this need to become such an activist in their communities, let alone at the public library, and to do this. I even said to her, look, is there any standard? Can you tell me any standard that ought to guide what we put in our libraries? Because you're accusing me of trying to censor books. I said, what is that standard and who decides? Because we have a standard, and I think parents should be able to decide what's best for their kids. And she said, that's up for the library people to decide. I said, no, it's not. The libraries are paid for by taxpayers. And I understand at the end of the day, the library board or administrator does make some decisions about, buying books for the library. But the community does have a voice and should be a part of that conversation. And this idea that parents who object have no say whatsoever is just simply outrageous. She even said, well, what do you say to those people that say this is a minority view in this community? Where this library is located is represented by an openly gay legislator, and that these people don't represent the community. And I said, majority rule is not what decides what's best in the community. These parents are taxpayers, and they have every right to do what they want to do. And I said, we're not asking them to break any laws or to break any library rules. They can check books out. And she kind of retorted, well, they can, but they can't keep them out forever. I said, well, as far as I understand, they could continue to check out the book and renew it. And so, of course, I believe there's more to the story in this library. I think they're trying to purchase some of these books back again, because kids somehow will be, malformed if they don't have access to gay pornography and instructions how to engage in, sexual acts at a young age. It's just simply outrageous the way in which the media is weaponizing itself for the purposes of the LGBT agenda and the most extreme parts of this agenda, by the way.
Yeah, and this is kind of a cool moment where we see the fruits of a seed of an idea we had a few years ago, knowing we'd be in these kind of conversations with people that simply can't defend the type of things that we're targeting. So while I have you, I remember being in a strategy meeting. I think it was a brainstorming meeting we had with the programming team here. And there was kind of a general frustration, not just with us, but with people in our community seeing, Pride Month is coming and libraries seem to be this kind of headquarters for complete filth that shouldn't be in front of children. Do you remember actually like being in that strategy meeting? How did we come up with this idea that ended up actualizing as Hide the Pride?
Oh boy, I don't remember all the details. I just remember that these every June it seems, or every year it seems like they ratchet up the pressure even more. And some articles have just been written in the last couple of weeks about how the gay rights movement has really overreached here, and some of even gay advocates are saying, look, when they started coming after kids and trying to influence and convince kids that they need access to these kinds of materials, that all of them should be questioning their gender. That's where they overreached. We've gone from, civic partnerships to same-sex marriage. We just want to be able to love the person we love, to now gay porn in libraries on display for young children to access. And that somehow if you object to that, you are a bigot, a homophobe, and outside the bounds of what normal people ought to tolerate. And so I don't remember how it originated, but we knew that they were coming for the kids. And of course, the library is the new, arena where this is being fought. And again, there's a reason why Moms for Liberty, and I was just with their founder last week in Iowa, and a lot of these groups are out there now saying,
does that mean
enough.
are you pro-Hitler then too?
Yeah, right, exactly. Apparently, well, this is the whole thing.
David
now.
French said so, and he's a journalist, so he must be trustworthy.
Oh, because I talked to someone from Moms for Liberty who used a Hitler quote to warn people about what fascist people do when they go after kids, right?
Yep.
Of course. Absolutely.
I mean, that's a whole nother study right there, is just the amount of slander Moms for Liberty has gotten of just these groups didn't exist before. You must listen to the Loopcast because you brought up a lot of the talking points here, but there's just we live in new times where organizations like this are necessary, but a lot of people didn't really have the guts to form these kind of things, or like you said, maybe would have even been embarrassed to be doing this, but because people have much more personal reasons. Like you can personally say how the trans movement has impacted you and your children easily now. It takes 2 seconds. So people have a lot more courage, I think, to come up with these things. So I think for people that, want to look into Catholic Vote and the way that we think about making an impact practically as lay people who want Catholics to be politically involved, you obviously being the head of that, how do you think about, what is the purpose of Catholic Vote? Why do we exist? Let's just leave it at that. Why do you think Catholic Vote needs to exist right now?
Well, because there is never a time where the gospel is not relevant. And the church is a 2,000-year-old institution that's still relevant for a reason. And that is because the message of Jesus Christ, the message of our church, the wisdom of our church, Catholic social teaching will always be relevant. And what it needs is creative people, courageous people, and the grace of God to work together to figure out how to influence the culture and to bring the gospel to every corner. Go and baptize all nations, right? That does mean, yes, that sometimes you have to go into libraries and assert the truth that children, the innocence of children is important enough and deserves protection, and that those who seek to violate and to scandalize and to destroy children's innocence are not going to rule my community. The thing is we're not just talking again about access to a book. We're talking about material that when kids encounter this, it changes them forever. You can't take from a child's imagination the experience of reading or seeing the stuff in these books. It changes their brain. It changes what they understand, men and women and human sexuality and marriage and the idea of love itself. It's burned into their brain forever. And the other side knows exactly what they're doing. This is exactly why they're not just wanting a book on a shelf that someone could go check out if they want to find it. They're putting it on the display in children's sections, or in this case, by the way, she pushed back. It wasn't technically in the kids section. It was on the public display right as you walk in, of course, where kids can see and access. And it's saying to everyone, including kids, these are books that we think are really important and helpful, and that people should be able to see these. So, there is not only never a time to not spread the gospel, there's never a time to stand up for the good beauty of a child's imagination.
Yeah, and I think the social contagion element of all of this has become so prevalent. If you look at numbers of identification in ages as early as elementary school now have just astronomically increased. So this continual kind of cultural conditioning to things that are not going to lead to a happy, healthy life. I just think like so much of this is just more humanity. Like the Catholicism and Catholic Vote here, we have a vision that's been given to us by years and years and years of intellectual thought and church tradition that has led to human flourishing. And we have just as much a right to say that as any other group, if that.
Well, I'll get risky here and say something pretty provocative. What we're talking about here happens to coincide with a time when this movie, The Sound of Freedom, is very popular. Don't kid yourself. These two things are related. Are these books advocating child sex trafficking? No, of course not. Are they how-to guides? But you know what? The same ideology is driving both. And it's this hypersexualization of children that's leading to very terrible, monstrous people that are exploiting the innocence of kids. And I'm sorry, so are these books.
Yeah, I mean, one of the books actually, I think, had a section where it taught a child how to use the internet to reach out for sexual partners as young as 13. So I think you're generous by saying that they maybe don't even teach it. Some genuinely do teach ways that kids do get taken. I'm happy to get riskier too, because it's such an odd, having this argument in the public has been so weird, because people like Barack Obama, former president, have come out and said, I'm celebrating banned books weeks because there's groups, not going to name names, but like Catholic Vote, that are trying to keep books from children that are just helping to keep democracy intact, spreading ideas, this and that. Like, these people know, right? They know what these books are. Are you granting them any benefit of the doubt here? Chelsea Clinton has also said things very similar. They must know, right?
No, actually, I don't think they do, Tom. This is the thing. Why I pressed this report, I even said to her, if you have the courage to actually tell the story here, which is to tell the public what's actually in these books, I suspect there would be a different kind of conversation we're having. I think a lot of these people are operating in this level that these are just innocuous, fine, affirming, good books for kids that are questioning their identity, and they need to feel like they are just as much a part and loved as everyone else. If that's what these books were, I can guarantee you that moms and families would not be going into libraries and trying to check them out and keeping them from people. She even asked me, she said, look, are you in favor of all LGBT books being removed from libraries altogether? I said, no, actually, we're not in favor of just anything that has to do with, LGBT to be stripped from libraries. That would actually be censorship. I said, that said, there are a lot of these books that, in my view, have no educational purpose whatsoever. A library doesn't put Playboy magazine or Hustler magazine, when they were published, into a library and say, look, anything goes. We have zero standards. And if someone wants to look at this, then there's a reason for that. No, we said absolutely not. We as a community have standards. We're not going to put these books in there. And so I think our position is actually the very reasonable one. And a lot of these people out there talking about book banning and book burning or whatever it might be, I don't think they're informed. And they're not informed because journalists at the New York Times, like this woman I spoke to, refuses to tell the truth when they report on a story like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so she's going to come out with a piece, to say the least, and keep an eye out for that. Another just kind of insider question I have for you, Brian. You started Catholic Vote a long time ago. You've been doing this for a long time. You have a family, you have kids. I think a lot of people are scared now of, say, national attention because things can go viral so quickly, that a narrative that can be pushed, that can be, a little bit scary to handle that much public blowback. Was that ever a fear of yours at any point in your time with Catholic Vote?
Oh, yeah, it's always a fear. It's another reason not to get photographed by the New York Times, I suppose. I do think about that a lot, about when we say things or I'm in the news, is there a day coming, and inevitably it will, where I'll have people outside my house or harassing my kids, or, obviously, you see what comes in. We get all sorts of threats and, curse words leveled at us online every single day. You kind of, learn to take those arrows. But yeah, of course, I think anyone with kids in my position or others, you worry, what is the left willing to do? They're lighting our churches on fire and defaming statues and desecrating our churches. Those are generally, for now, empty buildings. What happens when they go after churches filled with buildings, or God forbid, come after people's homes, people like you and me that work for organizations like Catholic Vote? I mean, the left has set up these hate maps. If you remember, right after the 2020 election, a lot of these left-wing groups created these images where the offices of advocacy groups like ours and others were located around DC, in part because they had, BLM, domestic terrorists in the streets, threatening a lot of these places. You have to be kind of really naive to think this is not a possibility. And, whether, it was my choice or more than likely God's providence, this is the vocation that I'm in, and this is where God put me. And if you know me, I like the fight. I like the adventure. I certainly don't want to do anything reckless to put my family in peril, but I guess I was born for this. People that know me as a kid, I was always causing a little trouble, including in politics, by the way, for the good side. And so, it takes a particular kind of personality to do this kind of thing. And I think, thankfully, there's a lot of people that are finding that they too are called to start getting involved, to start doing something, lest we lose our country and lose our kids.
Yeah, for sure. And Catholic Vote, I think, has been, it's a blessing to me personally, and it's given me this opportunity. I remember, just to go super insider as well, there was a comment you made back at the one of our retreats we did that has stuck with me, and it said, when you get big time, then you can have me on, and I haven't forgotten about that. We've been able to keep cultivating this audience of people that have kept coming back so that, I could have you on this program. But I really am grateful for you starting this, and then you kind of having the fighter spirit to take these people head on. And I think a lot of people in the audience feel very similar. Like we kind of have someone fighting on our behalf because we share the beliefs, and we kind of need, we need to see someone in public doing something. And I want to give the opportunity. I'm sorry if you were going to say something, but I was going to give you the opportunity.
I was going to say something about that. You just kind of gave me a lot of credit, founding it, having the fighter spirit. The truth is, I don't do this in a vacuum. And it's interesting because I'm talking here on something where a lot of people are going to listen. There is no doubt in my mind that a lot of the motivation and a lot of the confidence I get is when we see other people standing with us. When you see these courageous parents in San Diego standing up, and now the New York Times and LA Times is doxing them, but also when you see our social media, when you see our emails, when you see people chipping in and helping, when we able to go after the Dodgers, and you say, you know what, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people out there like me that agree with me that want to do something too. That is hugely helpful and gives me a ton of confidence and courage. And in many ways, that's a big reason why I'm able to do the stuff we're doing.
Absolutely. And the only reason I'm able to do what I do here and everyone at Catholic Vote, it's because of loopers. It's because of people in the audience who are courageous themselves. So we can't thank you enough. I also want to just back that sentiment because it's so important. And I never want to forget that. I think about that every time, we publish anything. This is who we're working for. So hopefully people are a little inspired after that. Thanks, Brian. There's something in Ohio going on that I want to bring as much attention to as possible. It's one of our biggest initiatives. Can you just, for the people in Ohio or people that know people in Ohio, can you just give a brief pitch for what Catholic Vote is focusing on specifically here in July and August?
Yeah, so big fight in Ohio. This is where the abortion industry is going next. They think, look, we can overturn the abortion law in Ohio, a big red state, we can go anywhere. And so what Ohio did was say, wait a minute, we need to understand what's happening. Big George Soros, ACLU, Planned Parenthood, they're going to bring in their millions of dollars to change our Constitution. Maybe we need to look at how easy it is to change our Constitution. And very few states, by the way, allow voters to put something on the ballot and by a simple majority vote to change the Constitution. Of course, the federal Constitution, there's much higher threshold to do that. And a lot of states have equally high thresholds to actually change the constitution of the state. And so what they said is, before the abortion industry is able to put this vote to a people in November, we're going to give the people a chance to change the way that we amend our Constitution. And so this August, there is a ballot initiative that will be voted on in August, only a couple more weeks from now, where the people of Ohio will decide whether to raise the threshold to 60%, so that if any group, right or left, Planned Parenthood, Catholic Vote, etc., put something on the Ohio ballot, it will take 60% of the people to approve to amend the Constitution. And so we are very involved because essentially this is the setup to November. And if we can win here, I think we can stop the abortion train that's heading towards Ohio, and it will be very difficult to defeat given the lies they tell about what they're doing. And so we have people on the ground. Our political team is on the ground in Ohio full time. We've recruited hundreds of volunteers across the state. Many of them are assigned as parish captains. I think there's about 800 Catholic parishes in Ohio. We have a good chunk of them allocated now with captains. We provide them tools, postcards. We pay for postage and postcards where they're handwriting to fellow Catholics across the state. Digital ads, text messages. We have a whole advertising campaign that's coming. And the key here is it's expected, the turnout expected, because this is August and a lot of people paying attention, expected to be around 10%. So only 10% of the electorate is going to decide this really critical question for the state. And so it's not a lot of like persuasion work you need to do, trying to convince a voter of the rightness of this. You're just trying to get people that already agree with us to actually turn out. And so we're doing a big, massive, what's called GOTV, Get Out the Vote campaign in Ohio. In the run-up, early voting's already underway. So if you live in Ohio, don't wait till Election Day. Go vote now. You can get your vote in. Tell everyone you know. Tell everyone in your parish. And by the way, the church, Catholic Church in Ohio, is really doing a good job here. Because there's not candidates involved, it's merely an issue. They are pushing and allowing information to be distributed in parishes to encourage people to vote, encourage people to go vote yes on Proposition 1, I believe is what the name of it is.
Yeah, in the spirit of insider information, I think we saw a picture of Scott Hahn. For all the Scott Hahn fans out there, opened his home to people to help write these postcards and just get it out to as many people as possible. So just some cool stories like that of, this is something that typically would just be a huge loss for Catholics and people and pro-life people in Ohio, because what happens is Planned Parenthood, deep pockets, they're just going to pour millions of dollars into the state. ACLU, I think, is putting some money in there. I want to say it's got to be over $4 million at this point. We did an interview with Logan, the political director, who said at the time we recorded, it was $3.3 million just poured in the state. So it's kind of cool. We're seeing a real grassroots response to what typically would just kind of be almost a chalked up, they're just going to outspend us, right?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not just 4 million. It's going to be 40 to 60 million that they're going to spend in the state. Wow. They're spending over $1 million a day right now on TV alone. So the money is massive. They know what's at stake. They lost in Dobbs. Their strategy now is to go state by state to impose abortion by undermining state laws, particularly states that have passed, like Ohio, protections for unborn kids. And they believe this is how they can win. And of course, one of the reasons why they're winning is they're absolutely lying about what these laws will do. These laws will strip parents of all their rights when it comes to drugs and surgery. So it's not just about abortion. It's also about the gender stuff we were just talking about. Abortion in many ways is about sidelining the role of mothers and fathers. This is the abortion industry totally exploits vulnerable women, young women in particular, including minor women, including sex trafficked women. We did an ad with a sex trafficked woman who said, if only my mom would have known, this could have stopped. And this is exactly what the left is trying to do. And so, it's super important that people pay attention to what's happening in Ohio. If you know anyone in Ohio, if you live in Ohio, big vote coming up here in just a couple weeks in August.
All right, Brian, this is a little bit of a risk here, but for people that don't know, we have a monthly meeting with the entire staff. Brian is quite fond of finding an inspirational clip somewhere in media. I believe our last one was a clip from Miracle on Ice, if anyone has ever seen the famous coach speech. Is there any inspiration that you've been dwelling on that maybe you've been thinking about sharing at the next one, or just anything that's been inspiring you recently?
Oh boy, there's always inspirational things. You're always reading things. You think, oh, I need to remember that. I'm glad you brought up the miracle clip. That's a perfect line for people to hear. Maybe you could play it here, a clip of it when you put this together. But there's the locker room speech that Kurt Russell, who's playing the coach, and he says to his team, "You were made for this. You were born to be hockey players." And of course, I like to translate that. You were born to be a Catholic. God intended this, and he ends the speech by saying,
"Screw them. This is your time. Now go out there and take it."
I just love that speech. Anyone who sees the movie Miracle knows, you want to get out of your seat, and they go out in the arena, and it's in Lake Placid in 1980. We're taking on the Russians, and the crowd's chanting USA, USA. And of course, they go on to beat them, the famous line, "And do you believe in miracles?" And I said this to you guys as the staff. Do you believe in miracles? Not hockey games. Do you believe that we can change this country? And I know we do.
Absolutely. I can't sign us off any better than that. Brian, thank you for coming on, and hopefully we can make this a little bit of a regular segment every once in a while.
Great to be on. And Tom, you guys have become big time. So I'm glad to be here.
I do believe in miracles. All right. See you guys next episode.